So we begin Area 4 with Arya during one of her sword training lessons with Sirio, and the moral tale of this chapter seems to be that Sirio is teaching her that watching is not seeing. Sirio tells her of how he became the first sword of Bravos, and we find that the Sea Lord of Bravos appears to be a collector of strange animals which he keeps in a menagerie. And apparently, out of the animals we see here, there are apparently striped horses, great spotted things with necks as long as stilts, hairy mouse pigs as big as cows, stinging manticores, tigers that carry their cubs in a pouch, and terrible walking lizards with scythes for claws. All of which seem to be referencing either real-world animals that have went extinct or animals such as they were described in bestiaries of the medieval age, such as the giraffe, which was historically believed to be a fictional creature based on accounts, because no one in those times could believe that such a creature actually existed. Now, one of the animals that the Sea Lord had was a fat yellow cat, and Sirio passes the test when he views it, as he notes that he has seen thousands like it in the alleys of Bravos, which apparently no one else has claimed. Sirio notes that the cat was an ordinary cat, nothing more, and that the others were expecting a fabulous beast, so that is what they saw. There was comments on how large it was, and it was only large in the sense that it was fat from sitting and feeding from the Sea Lord's table. It had small ears, which was only because they had been chewed away by kitten fights, and it was plainly a boy, and yet the Sea Lord kept referring to it as a her, and so that's what others believed. And so Sirio impresses upon her that opening your eyes is all that is needed, as the heart tells lies and the head plays tricks, but the eyes see true. Look with your eyes. Basically, the moral of the story is don't take things at face value. And before they are interrupted, Sirio notes that by the time they reach Winterfell, it will be time to put Needle in her hands. Now, this whole conversation is quite interesting if you consider the fact that the longest running theory surrounding Sirio is that he is actually one of the Faceless Men. And the contents of this conversation do seem to strongly hint at this possibly being the case, as we find that the whole story regarding the Sea Lord, while many believe this to be a sort of Emperor's New Clothes style fable, where people are just telling the Sea Lord what he wants to think, and he chooses Sirio because he tells him the truth, it's entirely possible there is more going on here, and that the tale is referencing glamours, which we have already had hints at already in the story from Varys potentially using glamours to disguise himself. And so this may be a very, very early part of Arya's training for the Faceless Order, and that Sirio is subtly giving her hints on how glamours work. And if we bear that in mind, it's entirely possible that none of what Sirio is telling Arya is actually factual regarding the Sea Lord of Bravos and his menagerie, as most of these creatures are in fact fantastical enough that they supposedly would not exist, and it's entirely possible that this entire story is being fabricated, much like the Faceless people later teach her to fabricate backstories, with the only part of the story with any hint of truth in it being the fact that Bravos was involved, because that is where George is going to eventually lead us with the Faceless Man's story. So it does make sense if Sirio was in actual fact an agent of the Faceless Order who has been sent here to raise Arya for some form of divine purpose. And again, this does make sense given that the last line before he cuts off is the fact that he notes by the time they reach Winterfell, they will have Needle in her hands, which is exactly what we see happen in the show by the end. By the time she reaches Winterfell, she is ready to stick somebody with the pointy end and win the war. And given that the Faceless mandate seems to be that they are wanting to end the immortal beings of this world, it makes sense that she is being chosen and reared to assassinate the origin of the others. And so while they are interrupted by Med and Trant and the guards who have come to take her into custody following Ned's capture, Sirio forces her to flee while he himself takes them on. And we see from this point here that Sirio is almost supernaturally good at defending himself from his attackers, which is made all the more curious by the fact that we never actually do get confirmation that Sirio is killed in this battle, leading us to assume that the theory about him being a faithless man does actually stand up. And so Arya continues to flee from the battle, leaving Sirio's fate unknown, and as she runs, she remembers his teachings, which go through her head, and we see once again that there are multiple actions which are attributed to animals, which again makes me think that Sirio is indeed a faceless man, and they are actually part of a secret order who want to restore balance by killing the immortals. And so these nature references indicate that the true conspirators behind this want for balance is actually nature itself. The children of the forest are the ones enacting this. Fleeing past the Tower of the Hand, Arya comes across the bodies of many of the people she had known who came to King's Landing with her father, and soon she discovers that the chests that were being loaded onto the cart for them to go to the ship have fallen, and coincidentally she finds Needle. She is however surprised by the attack of a stable boy, and notably what happens when he grabs her is all of Sirio's teachings fail her. She forgets everything and then defaults back to the first ever lesson she was taught by John, to stick him with the pointy end, which again is exactly what we see happen in the end of the TV show, which makes me wonder if this is going to play out the same in the story of the books. Arya is going to eventually stab some major character. Now, interestingly enough, she prepares to sneak past multiple guards in order to escape and hears a voice whisper in her ear, which startles her so much that she drops what she is carrying, which is strange as she then questions was it her own voice or Sirio's, but it had at least calmed her fears, which makes me wonder what the actual origin of this voice is. However, we do get mention at other points in the book that the wind whispers the words of the gods, so it's possible that the people who are enabling her training may still be here influencing things even now. If the children of the forest speak the language of the wind, then they are the ones sending her this message. Arya continues her escape by entering the secret underground tunnels and vaults which she had once travelled through in the previous chapter. And here she remembers that fear cuts deeper than swords, which is a very poignant message to have, as fear, as we see from the likes of June, is the mind killer. Fear is the ultimate enemy against rational thought. Much like the Jedi teach us, fear leads to anger, anger leads to hate, and hate leads to suffering. So if someone can conquer fear, that gives them so much more potential to deal with situations. And it's while walking through these dark underground crypts full of dragon skulls here that Arya remembers the crypts of Winterfell, which she notes were a lot scarier than this place, and she had just been a little girl the first time that she'd saw them, and Rob had taken her down there alongside Sansa and baby Bran. Now, Old Nan had told them that there were spiders down here, as well as rats as big as dogs, which Rob had noted that there are worse things than spiders and rats. This is where the dead walk, which led John to walk out of the tombs covered in flour to look like a ghost, and screaming for blood. Now, this story is interesting when you look at the symbolism surrounding it, as they note that there are spiders and rats as big as dogs down here. Now, both spiders and rats have connections from my fairy videos that you've seen, if you've watched those, to the Andals, which in the whole mythos of the ancient times on the wall implied that the others were in actual fact knights who were potentially Andals who were taken by the children of the forest and converted into the others, like we see happening in the TV show. But what is more interesting is the fact that Rob says the dead walk down here, which again we see in the final season of the show. They hide in the crypts from a being who can resurrect the dead, only to have him resurrect the dead from the crypts to attack them, leading me to believe that something similar is going to happen in Winterfell in the books. There's definitely something up with the crypts, and as I have pointed out in previous chapters that I've analysed here, the crypts almost seem to be like some kind of weirwood tree grove nest like the children of the forest have in other locations. So the whole idea of Arya being ready to have Needle in her hand when she reaches Winterfell may be because that is where the final battle will take place because that is where the true conspirators actually are. They are in the crypts. And we also get our final bit of imagery here in the fact that John is the one to be dressed as a ghost walking out of the crypts. And interestingly enough, John, currently in the books at the time of making this video, has been supposedly killed, but is highly likely believed, like in the show, to be resurrected by Melisandre at the wall, making him ghost-like. He is a resurrected being or Azor Ahai. And curiously enough, the crying out for blood also seems to symbolise the true beings behind the crypts of Winterfell, the children of the forest who have become stone statues while sitting beneath the weirwood roots. They seek blood because they are tied to the weirwoods.